All right. Well, I think we can probably get started. Good Wednesday morning. I'm Anna Palmer, a founder of Punchbowl News, and I am joined by fellow founder Jake Sherman for our first Punchbowl News pop-up conversation with Senator Chris Coons, the Democratic senator from Delaware. I want to extend a big thank you to Southern Company for making this conversation possible.
Our mission with these events is simple. We want to bring you closer to key decision makers in Washington. As always, please tweet at us using the hashtag PunchbowlNews, and you can subscribe to our free morning newsletter at our website, punchbowl.news.
All right. And with that, let's get to it. We want to bring in, before our conversation with the senator, Tom Fanning. He's CEO, chairman, and president of Southern Company, for a fireside chat to talk a bit about what the company is focused on here in Washington, as well as on climate policy altogether.
Anna, great to see you.
Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Hey, best of luck with this. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I wish it was in person, but this is as good as it gets these days.
You bet. You bet.
Well, perfect. Well, I want to start out. Southern Company is based in Georgia. The state has been in the news a lot recently, most recently over a controversial voting bill. Some executives at companies like Coca-Cola and Major League sports teams that are based there have publicly condemned the bill. Can you talk a little bit about how you and Southern are approaching this issue?
Oh, sure. This is such an important, serious issue. And fundamentally, elections are at the core of who we are as Americans. And I think everyone supports fair elections permitting ease of voting and integrity in result. I think that I'm afraid, for all the good intentions on both sides, I think emotion has taken over and the discourse has become too political. In many roles that I've played, whether it's cybersecurity or economics with the Fed or energy policy, very often I think the best role for the private sector to play is to work in the middle to bring both sides together quietly and effectively. We're working here with the Bipartisan Policy Center in many regards. I want to compliment them. They've done a lot of good work on election integrity, as they have. I know we're going to talk about climate and other issues with things like the American Energy Innovation Council. I'm on that with Bill Gates and others, and also the Net Zero Business Alliance. These are the kinds of organizations that I think are most effective right now.
So let's talk about infrastructure for a minute. I mean, this is the major priority, as you probably are well attuned to, Tom, in Washington right now. I want to dig in on a couple angles, but let's talk about one of the more interesting angles. The president is, and with all caveats, that what we like to say, Tom, is that the president proposes and Congress disposes. But the president has indicated he's interested in moving the corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%, undoing much of the 2017 tax bill. I'm curious where you guys stand on that.
Well, look, long term, you have to consider all issues here. This isn't just about tax policy. And in fact, the broader discussion right now, I think, in regards of energy, is what are all the arrows in the quiver, if you will, in order to advance another initiative by President Biden on getting to net zero as a nation by, say, 2050. And I think his incentive is to move this industry to net zero by 2035. We've already committed to 2050 net zero as a company, and we're working very hard to try and advance that time frame with this administration and with Congress. We set in place an intermediate goal of achieving 50% reductions by 2030. Well, in fact, I announced in my last earnings call that we achieved that 10 years early. We did it in 2020. So we're always working and thinking about ways to drive that result faster. Part of the answer is that we must collaborate with government. This can't be if this, then that. It must be both people, both institutions working together to get a good result for all Americans. So we need both parties in the boat working together to try and figure out how to achieve these lofty objectives. Tax policy is just one of those many issues.
Could we, sorry, Anna, go ahead.
I was just gonna. I want to shift gears. I want to make sure we do talk about. You mentioned earlier this week these kind of ambitious goals that Southern Company has set around emissions. I want to talk about what you're seeing in the infrastructure package, because the climate policy as part of this kind of very broad definition of infrastructure is really where Joe Biden is going. Are there things that you think Southern will support? Are there things that you're super focused on that you want to make sure are actually in that proposal?
Well, look, so that work is still ongoing, and so discussing details at this point are probably not as productive as looking for principles. One of the principles we always look for, whether it's economic policy, tax policy, or whether it's energy policy, is one of balance. And so as CEO of a company that's roughly the size from an energy standpoint as the nation of Australia, a little bit less, but that's about the magnitude of our company. It is the idea of balancing clean, safe, reliable, and affordable energy for the benefit of our customers. And that includes long-term economic effects and really people's standard of living. So there is a whole lot tied up in that. And I think in the conversations that I've had so far, I think there is recognition that energy policy is central to providing a healthy economy for the long-term benefit of our citizens.
I want to talk about a couple more things before we get off here, but reskilling and job training. Curious how it's something you're focused on, and I'm curious what your view is on the federal government's role and how you see that breaking down in this package.
Well, we there's always this idea of carrots and sticks, incentives and penalties in order to pursue. But Jake, you raise a very important issue, and it's really kind of twofold. Number one, if we are going to transition at the pace I think the administration wants to, we're going to need to think about the dislocation of communities that we serve, both in terms of tax base as we start to close down more coal facilities, as well as job retraining and a way to help displaced workers find new work in the new economy. So that is a big deal. And so we've worked very hard on that. We've already retired, I don't know, something like 70% of our coal assets so far.
Wow.
Before I became CEO, we generated 70% of our electricity from coal. Latest reporting period, I think that number was down to around 16%.
Wow.
So we're moving, as big as we are, we're moving very quickly. But associated with that is, what is the impact on communities? What is the impact on employees? And how can we transition? In order to hit net zero for this industry by 2035, and for this company, we are going to have to undertake a building program that is 3 times bigger than anything we've ever experienced in our history. Do we have the personnel in place to carry out that important work? Do we have tax policy in place that will ease infrastructure investment? Do we have supply chains in place that will permit the orderly flow of material to get it done? These are big issues, but we're committed to working with folks to get the best result we can.
We are just about to get the hook here on this portion of the conversation before we bring the senator in. But before I do, I want to just kind of zoom out a little bit, because you mentioned at the top, which was really this kind of concept of bipartisanship, that's something that you're very focused on. In Washington, where we sit, usually in the Capitol, it's a very partisan place, and there's very little movement in terms of trying to get both sides able to come to agreement. How important from the private sector? Can you just kind of, what's your message to Congress or to Washington in terms of the fact that Republicans and Democrats need to be able to come together here?
It's critical, and I want to applaud Senator Coons for his efforts on building consensus. The Senate, I think, historically has been pretty famous for, careful deliberation and really thinking about how to bring America forward. When I think about Coons's efforts in the Senate, this is the kind of discourse we need. These effects at the end of the day are so big and so pervasive, we can't let them become just a divisive issue on one side or the other. These issues for the good of America must be done in a bipartisan. And in fact, I'm the only kind of private sector CEO on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. I'm very proud of the language in the report there. And I describe it as nonpartisan rather than bipartisan. That says we must collaborate. You don't see words like cooperate and things like that. We must collaborate with the public sector in order to achieve the best result.
All right. Well, we'll leave it on that note. Tom, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Hey, Jake and Ann, I'm sorry, but I want to give you guys just the best of luck in the Punchbowl news effort. We certainly applaud this kind of forum.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. All right. And with that, we are going to exit Tom. Thank you so much. And bring on Senator Chris Coons, the Democrat from Delaware, to join the conversation. All right.
How are you, Jake? How are you, Anna?
Hi, Senator Coons.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
As somebody who went to school in New Haven, I'll ask you about your pizza preferences at the end of this segment, but we'll get to some of the. Oh, come on, modern. So listen, we'll start at the top with infrastructure, and which is the biggest thing of the moment. You're an Amtrak rider, so you know all well about the need for infrastructure improvement in America. Let's talk about bipartisanship. You're somebody who's known in the Capitol as always striving for bipartisanship. We're pretty bearish on bipartisanship in this infrastructure package. Are we wrong?
It depends what you mean by this infrastructure package. If you mean the entire arc and scope of what President Biden has put out, it's a bold plan to not just reinvest in fixing things like passenger rail, bridges, roads, tunnels, ports, but also forward-looking investments in the care economy, in making our country more climate resilient and more climate change prepared, and in raising revenue by raising taxes in order to pay for much of it. I think it will be a genuine challenge to get Republican support. I've spoken to several Republican colleagues this week while senators are not in DC. And it's always interesting. The conversations are a little bit longer, a little more personal, a little more thoughtful with members who are in their home states, getting a chance to catch up with their families. Things get a little snippier and a little tougher when we get back into Washington. I do think that there is an opportunity here for us to come together around a smaller package. And by smaller, I mean hundreds of billions of dollars that is directly targeted at hard infrastructure and will create the kind of investment, the kinds of new jobs and the kind of competitiveness for our economy that Tom was just talking about. There is a desperate need for investment in skills for the workforce, in getting people back to work as we come out of this pandemic. And I believe President Biden is open to spending the next month negotiating what that possibility is. There is also, though, a real sense of urgency. I had a chance to talk with the president earlier this week, and one of the things I admire about him is he is clear-eyed about what happened in 2009, 2010, about the significance for our country and the world of getting real, robust, and sustained growth going in this country. And since the election, since the day of the election, President Biden has been relentlessly focused on getting shots in arms, on delivering vaccination. And I think as of yesterday, 108 million Americans have had at least their first shot, and more than 60 million are fully vaccinated. Here in the state of Delaware, our governor declared yesterday that everyone over 16 is eligible to get a shot, and there are lots of locations and lots of shots available. The sense of optimism that is producing, along with the fine spring weather here, is creating a real sense of sort of lift and hope. So I hear that you're bearish on infrastructure, but I'm going to keep talking to my colleagues, both parties, to see what we can get done to reinvest in American competitiveness, to strengthen our infrastructure, and frankly, to show the American people and the world that we can legislate together on some big and important issues.
Could I just dig in on that for one more question, Anna? I just want to press you on what you mean on this. So if you're talking about a small package with hundreds of billions of dollars, talk a little bit more about that, because that seems interesting. That's an interesting point of view. A lot of people have said that. Would that pair with taxes? Would with a tax increase? I mean, how do you see that coming together?
So there's a lot of challenges, and without getting into the details of any particular conversation, several fairly seasoned senior Republicans have surprised me by saying they'd be willing to vote for something up to $1 trillion. And they're willing to raise some taxes to pay for it. One of the challenges is which taxes. There are some Republicans saying they're willing to raise the gas tax. They're willing to impose a new, what's called vehicle miles traveled fee for road infrastructure, as long as this is dedicated to improving road infrastructure on electric vehicles. And there is some resistance on the part of others to doing anything that would roll back the TCJA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the Trump era Republican-only tax cut package from 2017. You've also reported, and others have reported, there are some in my caucus who are resisting the idea of raising the corporate rate to 28. But there are more ways than one to raise revenue. We've got a much bigger menu than just the gas tax and the corporate rate. Frankly, there are lots of ways that large corporations, particularly multinational corporations, avoid paying taxes at all. And while what gets reported in the news is sort of the faceplate, is it 35 or 21 or 28, right, the base rate number, the reality is that an awful lot of the largest companies pay much less than 28%, but that's because of complex tax code provisions. If there are political challenges with raising the rate to 28, then I think we need to be having a conversation about what are the pay-fors. The other option, frankly, is for us to not fully pay for it. And in talking with some Republicans and some of my Democratic colleagues this week, look, we just passed $4 trillion worth of pandemic relief last year. And only Democrats. We passed the American Rescue Plan at $1.9 trillion just a few weeks ago. And that's now sending out checks to, I think, 80% of American households. So in the choice between raising taxes significantly and simply looking at each other and saying, we need a robust recovery, I think it's more likely that we will have a package that is not paid for and that is less robust, but still putting hundreds of billions of dollars into infrastructure. You mentioned that I ride the rails regularly when I go back and forth to Washington. There's $80 billion in the president's proposal. I think we need to invest that kind of amount of money for the rail system in the United States to get back up to safe operating standards. And I think it would pay huge dividends for us to invest in passenger rail, in airports, in water ports, in seaports, forgive me, and in the highways of our nation.
That's some news, Anna. I'm just for everyone watching, that was pretty newsy. Go ahead, Anna.
All right. Well, we got a lot to cover, but I do want to ask kind of a double question. One, you're talking about bipartisanship with this infrastructure package, but if, as you say, the Biden administration has learned the lessons of 2009, if it just doesn't seem possible to find a bipartisan way forward on this, do you support using reconciliation? And then kind of secondarily to that, what is your take on the recent parliamentarian saying that you guys could potentially get 2 bites at the apple, which would,
or 200 for that matter,
and really change the way the Senate could be doing business?
And that doesn't really change the way the Senate does business. I think this is being overplayed in the sometimes breathless press coverage of sort of the inside the dome stuff. Look, Elizabeth hasn't fundamentally changed her views on what is and isn't eligible. Look, I'm talking to an audience of folks who mostly follow this very closely. So you understand that the bird bath is a somewhat mysterious dunking function. And how opening Anwar managed to pass the bird bath, but raising the minimum wage didn't, is still somewhat mysterious to me. But I don't think we are suddenly going to be able to do everything from immigration reform to background checks through reconciliation. So yes, it opens even more widely the door for the Democratic majority of 50 senators in the Senate and the very narrow Democratic majority in the House to pass spending bills without having to clear the filibuster hurdle in the Senate. But it doesn't mean that we can suddenly pass any bill we want. Reconciliation still has to be for passing bills that are overwhelmingly focused on budgetary impact rather than policy impact. Look, I think where we are is pretty simple. As we were heading out towards our 2-week recess, the question was, if President Biden proposes, as he did in Pittsburgh, a big, bold vision for a bill, and Democrats say they're determined to do it by reconciliation, will Republicans just throw up their hands and walk away? The answer is no. They're still willing to talk and to negotiate. On the other hand, is President Biden willing to wait until Labor Day for us to come together around some perfect bipartisan infrastructure package? No. Is he willing to wait to the 4th of July? Maybe. I'm speaking for myself now. I'm not quoting anybody in the administration. If we get to Memorial Day and there isn't a clear, this group of Republicans is willing to work on this menu with these pay-fors and on this timeline, I think Democrats just roll it up into a big package and move it. And at that point, the challenge is who within the Democratic caucus is saying, wait a minute, this is too big, or this is too much, or these pay-fors. So we have two tracks. What is it we can come together around? And what is it that the Democratic caucus can support? Let me briefly mention one other thing I think is exciting and important. There is on the Foreign Relations Committee, on which I serve, a truly bipartisan effort to come up with bills and initiatives that are around making the United States more competitive in our global confrontation with China. Senators Schumer and Young are sort of leading a Senate-wide across many committees effort to pull together a bill that will be introduced, I believe, next Monday, that will invest in American competitiveness. And there's a lot of good ideas in there. There's a lot of things that should be bipartisan in there. And that might also be a significant several $100 billion bill that would be reinvesting in innovation and competitiveness in manufacturing and skills. And I'm excited about that. I think that would send a very strong signal globally as well as domestically.
Yeah, that does seem to be the big chance of bipartisanship. And you answered part of my question, which is $100 billion. It looks like it's going to be a pricey piece of legislation, and we'll see how that kind of fits into the mosaic of things you guys are trying to do. Another question that I have on the same topic on climate and on the green economy and all the things that in that realm. I mean, so let's follow the framework you're talking about here, and you get Republicans in the mix some way or another. I wonder what you think is possible in the climate realm with Republicans, since as people like to say in the Capitol, you're not necessarily working from the same set of facts. Although I do get the impression now that you are working more from the same set of facts than you have been in the past on that topic.
Much more. And Jake, one of the things I've been doing with the incoming administration and their new, actually, folks in senior leadership who have not been part of conversations in the Senate in recent years. One of the big changes, I think, over the last 5 years has been the extent to which business leaders like Tom from Southern Company, but across a wide range of industries, from manufacturing and automobiles to cement to even petroleum, are now saying publicly, repeatedly, climate change is real, it is caused by people, and we have to take action to address it. To have the CEO of the Southern Company saying we are committed to net zero by 2050, and here's the pathway towards that, is a significant change from years ago, where the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the NEM and the Business Roundtable and other major business organizations, more often than not, in talking with Congress, would say, we're not sure climate change is real, and we're opposed to aggressive action to address it. That's just a caricature, but I know their positions have always been more complicated. But under the Obama administration, the Obama-Biden administration, there was a strong sense that Republicans were just refusing to have any serious conversations about bipartisan effort around climate. That has fundamentally changed. Other things have changed. A younger generation of Americans, Republican, Independent, and Democrat, all think action on climate is urgent. In the faith community and in the farming community, you've seen a real change. I am the co-founder and co-chair with Mike Braun of Indiana of the Climate Solutions Caucus, which has 14 members, so 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats. We all agree that the climate is changing, that human activity is causing that, and that we have to take action. Senator Stabenow of Michigan, chair of the Agriculture Committee, is teaming up with Mike, with Senator Braun, to move something called the Growing Climate Solutions Bill that they've introduced. They're going to have a hearing. They're going to have a markup in the next couple of weeks. The American Farm Bureau has endorsed that. That's an organization that would not have been publicly championing a bill with the word climate solutions in the title. And we've got a chance now with folks like Secretary Vilsack, Secretary Holland at Interior. One of the things that President Biden announced in his American Rescue Plan was a bold proposal for a new civilian climate corps to put tens of thousands of young people to work in public lands in our national parks, preparing for climate change and for climate resiliency. And I think this is a moment when we can and should, as we move towards Glasgow, towards the global conference, the Conference of Parties, what's called COP26, that'll be next fall. President Biden is convening a global conference around climate change, and the United States should be sending a bipartisan delegation to Glasgow with a bipartisan commitment to bold action. I was in Paris for the 2015 climate conference. There were competing delegations, Republicans basically saying, we don't need this, Democrats saying this is the greatest thing ever. We need to show the world in our own country that we can make bipartisan progress.
I want to talk, we're quickly running out of time here. These conversations go always too fast, but I do want to ask you about your personal relationship with President Joe Biden. He's tasked you recently to be an emissary for him abroad in Ethiopia. Is this a role you expect to be playing more? Are you kind of translating Biden to the senators that maybe don't know him as well since he hasn't been in office?
Well, I've known President Biden. It is still hard to call him President Biden instead of Joe, but it also makes me smile every time I get to call him President. I was an intern for him on the Senate Judiciary Committee 30 years ago when I was a law student. And obviously, I grew up in Delaware. I came up in local politics. He and I are the only two people in Delaware history to go from a county elected office straight to the U.S. Senate. And it was because of a call from him that I got into the race for this Senate seat that I currently hold. That had been
a memorable race that was.
A truly memorable race. An unexpected last-minute long shot win. Yes, I will concede that. But it's funny, the night of that primary, I was with Joe and he sort of clapped his hands on both my shoulders and said, "You're the luckiest guy on earth." I said, "Takes one to know one, Joe," because his own race in 1972 from a one-term county councilman, he beat a two-term governor, two-term senator in an incredible long shot race that catapulted him to the Senate and now to the White House. I do spend time, as you put it, translating sometimes President Biden. In the middle of the impeachment trial that many have forgotten, but that happened in January, I had lots of senators saying to me, "What does Joe Biden want us to do? What does the president think we should do?" And I'd say to them, he wants us to be senators. He's focused on vaccinations and getting us out of this pandemic and national recovery. And as someone who served in this chamber for 36 years, we have a moment that may be unique in our lifetimes in that we have a new president who served here and deeply respects this body. Most presidents come to the White House with very little experience in Congress and very little sense of the guardrails and the structure that our framers intended. We've got a president who actually wants us to step up and be bipartisan and deliver real legislative solutions and actually play the role that the Senate used to decades ago. But he's also clear-eyed about the very real restrictions and limitations on that, the ways in which the modern era, the recent couple of years here, at least the 10 years that I've been in the Senate, is not the days of old. So if we're going to make a change towards asserting the Senate's role in terms of foreign relations and foreign policy, in terms of domestic policy, we've got to do it. And we've got to be willing to step up and compromise. And to your question, Anna, I have had a chance to talk to Secretary of State Tony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and President Biden about my recent trip to Ethiopia as his emissary. The situation in Ethiopia is very difficult, very demanding. There is a genuine risk of famine in Tigray. There have been human rights violations, and there's a real challenge in getting Eritrean troops back out of Ethiopia and preventing the kind of really horrific collapse of a federal republic that many of us saw happen in Europe, in the Balkans, in Yugoslavia in the 90s. So I was happy to be given the opportunity to go and represent President Biden. Prime Minister Abe of Ethiopia gave me 5 hours of his time over 2 days. And I pressed President Biden's perspectives very hard and got some commitments. And so far, there have been some encouraging actions. But this is a very tough situation in a nation of 110 million people, one of the biggest countries in Africa. and one where I expect to remain engaged, as will many others who are concerned in Congress and the administration.
That was my next question. I anticipate you'll do a little bit more of this as time goes on. Is that your expectation?
Likely, yes.
Yeah.
One of the things I am eager to do, and I have discussed with the folks I just mentioned, is as it becomes more possible to safely travel, because all of us are vaccinated, I think having a bipartisan and bicameral delegation go to some of the more challenging regions of the world is important. The Senate is genuinely, we are really slow walking the confirmations of the most senior members of the administration. So, frankly, over at the State Department, there's a whole tier of folks, the sort of second and third tier, who aren't yet confirmed. The same is true at Department of Justice. The same is true at so many important federal agencies. We don't yet have any ambassadors confirmed to our major allies. So I am volunteering to help to the extent I can. But I've also got my day job here in Delaware representing the 900,000 people of Delaware, most of whom are much more concerned with how am I getting my shot? Am I going to get my stimulus check? Is the mail getting delivered? And are you fighting for veterans? And is my kid going back to school? They are about, the challenges around the rest of the world.
I assume that last one is the most important, kids going back to school. But Anna, go ahead.
Spoken as a parent who loves
yes,
college-age daughter at home. But, I think folks on my staff in Washington and here in Delaware who are parents with school-age kids, this has been enormously challenging for students and children, for teachers and staff, and for parents. And as we all readjust, I think, look, the Biden administration is doing a great job at delivering vaccinations ahead of time. And the test results are even more encouraging about the possibility of safely vaccinating teachers, staff, and school-age children. We really need to see schools opening by September. And we need to address, and we have just appropriated funds to do this, significant learning loss over the last year with robust summer programming. I really worry about a generation of kids who've lost an entire year of schooling.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are all out of time. Thank you so much, Senator Coons, for joining us this morning for a great conversation. We really appreciate it. And we also want to thank Southern Company for their partnership in making this event possible. And thank you to all of you who joined us on the live stream and on Twitter. We're going to be back with our next virtual event on April 20th at 4:30 p.m. with Republican Senator Susan Collins from Maine. We hope you can join us. And you can sign up for that event by going to the events page on our website, punchbowl.news. Stay safe and have a great day.